Okay, welcome everybody. This is it's very exciting for me as this is the last session of this series that we've been involved in the past couple weeks. Really, it's been 8. This is shir number 8, but it was 9 weeks because we took a 1-week break for Shavuos. And I really feel, and we're going to really sum it up and bring it home at the end for the last, at the very end. But I really felt that when preparing this one. It was a very, very timely message and I think, a nice wrap up of all of the lessons that we've learned along the way. And then at the end, when I finish the actual class, we'll discuss a little bit about moving forward, what the plan is for Wednesday nights moving forward, now that we finished this series. Okay, so which brings us to the last question that the Athenians asked Rabbi Yehoshua ben Hanania. It's a very exciting time. Again, this is the last question. After this one, again, if you haven't picked it up by now, but he's going to win the debate. And we're going to see what the question was, what the answer was. And I really, this one took me. It was a powerful lesson to learn, and I hope that I can impart it in a way that really we all get that message as well. So the last message is the final problem, the final debate. Achvilan mana de lo shavi chavile. So show us an implement, show us a tool that is not worth its depreciation. Meaning what? Meaning show us a tool. The literal translation is its damage. Meaning show us a tool that experiences. Meaning I'll just read the way the article translates it. In the note, an object cannot experience a decline in value greater than its total worth. So presumably there can never be an implement which is not worth its depreciation. Meaning, in a sense, its depreciation ends up costing it more than the object itself. In depreciation, the depreciated state ends up costing more than the object itself. Show us such an object. That's what they asked him. Show us an object that is not worth its depreciation. Meaning the depreciated state is going to be more valuable. Okay, that's the question they asked him. Okay, so what does he respond? So I see budya pshatua. So Yehoshua brought out a mat of reeds, like a mat, and spread it out. He unrolled it. So lo hava ayla batara, but it was too broad that he couldn't. Again, he's in their academy right now. So he went out. He got this mat of reeds, and he unrolled it, and it became wide. And what was the problem? It became too wide to bring back into the academy, to bring back inside the room. So what did he say? Lo hava ayla batara, couldn't get in the doorway. He says to them, Aitu mare sisrua. He said, therefore, bring me pickaxes. Right? Bring me pickaxes. Why? To demolish the door frame, and then I could fit in this mat of reeds. And he said, and if we do that, hainumana delo shava chavile. This is a mat which is not worth its depreciation. Because after all, you bring in the mat, a mat of reeds by definition is a very low cost item. It's very low cost. And the damage that you're doing to your house, the net loss is going to be greater than the gain of bringing in the mat of reeds. So this is an item that's not worth its depreciation. So again, on its surface, this is the victory. This is it. On its surface, this seems like a cute riddle, almost like a riddle you'd give a child, to try to figure it out. But we know there's always a deeper level here. And the question is, what is the question? What is the answer? And why is this the final hammer blow in this debate, which is ultimately going to seal Rabbi Yehoshua ben Hanania as the victor? So there are a couple of approaches that there are here. And again, as our custom, as it were, at this point, we're going to go with one that's a little bit more limited in scope. It's a little more specific. And then a second answer that I believe is really broad related, but much broader in terms of a Weltanschauung, a worldview that I hope we can glean from. So the Kedushas Levi, again, Levi Yitzchak Berditchev, we quoted it many times, along his normal lines, his normal way of explaining in a little more of a Hasidish type way, which is very often focused on not necessarily a philosophical point as much as what's called a point of musar, right? A way of character development. the Kedushas Levi explains that when it says, bring me something that's not worth its value, he shows them what is it. He says it's referring to what's called gaiva, right? Haughtiness, the unfurled mat of reeds. That when a person, very often they get full of themselves, they expand, they get broader, they get bigger. But what does he find? What does one find? We know that gaiva in general is the worst of the midos. That's what the Balei Musar, the Balei Chasidus, they explain that gaiva, that haughtiness, that sense of I, of myself, the ego, is one of the worst midos because in a sense, it defiles a person. It rots a person from the inside out in such a way that the Chazal teach us that it's one of the things that are more a person from the world, that bring a person out of this world. Because as we know, the famous story we know that one of the great evildoers in Jewish history was Yeravam ben Nevat. Yeravam ben Nevat was a terrible person. Yeravam was the rebel from the rebellion against Shlomo HaMelech's son Rechavam. Shlomo HaMelech had his kingdom after David HaMelech, and he passed it along to his son. Now, all this was obviously divinely ordained because Shlomo's son Rechavam messed up, and therefore the kingship was torn from him, and it was split. And the one who split up the nation, creating civil war, was Yeravam. But Yeravam wasn't just a political activist. He was more than that. And what he did was he actually created a second temple outside of Jerusalem, because he knew that if people whenever they had to go worship would have to go all the way to Jerusalem, to Yerushalayim, well, then they're going to be coming back to Shlomo. They're going back to Rechavam, Shlomo's son, and he didn't want them to go back to the Davidic dynasty. So he created his own temple, and as ironic as it sounds, as crazy as it sounds, at his temple he had 2 golden calves as part of the that were there, and we know that he posted sentries. This is one of the things he was infamous for, was posting sentries along the road to make sure if anybody was heading to Yerushalayim, he would stop them and kill them. And he would not allow people to go to Yerushalayim. He would not allow people to travel back to Davidic dynasty town, to the sons of David and Shlomo, and he really split the nation. And the Medrash tells us that after he dies, so Yeravam is approached by HaKadosh Baruch Hu and says, if you do teshuvah, if you repent for the things that you did, so you, me, and David HaMelech are all going to walk together in Gan Eden. Wow, what an opportunity. Someone so wicked, so evil, but given an opportunity by Hashem directly to do teshuvah, to repent. And his question, 2 words he says, that seals his fate. He says, sounds good, mi barosh. Who's going to be in front, me or David? I want to know. Yeah, you're giving me, who's going to be in front? And Hashem says, David's going to be in front. And he says, okay, then forget it. I'm out. We see the impact of gaiva, of haughtiness. Can you imagine? You had the opportunity. If you do teshuvah, me, you and David HaMelech are going to walk together in Gan Eden. And his question, the first thought, the ego, mi barosh, who's going to be in charge? Unbelievable. That's the path. And it sounds far-fetched, but again, we know from history, we know from experience, we know just from life, that that's the truth when it comes to gaiva, when it comes to haughtiness, that a person, once they get full of themselves and they stop taking the outside influence of people who can help them, and they start shutting people out, and they get so full of themselves, they bring about their own disaster. So says the Kedushas Levi, that is the utensil that's not worth its destruction. That's not worth its devaluation. Because once a person gets to that point, and he showed them, because you see that if a person ultimately becomes a Bal Gaiva, the only way to do it is by destroying the world around you. That's the message that he says. That it's only going to destroy the world around you, and that's not worth it. That's the message. And again, they took it a message of Musar, a real idea of humility, which again is what the Holy Torah is all about. That's the Kedushas Levi's approach. But I'd like to share another approach, and that's the approach of the Vilna Gaon. And the Vilna Gaon, again, as we're going to point out at the end of today, when we sum it all up, we're going to see that I see there's some new faces on Facebook Live. So this is number 8 of an 8-part series. But hopefully there's still plenty to gain from it nonetheless. The Vilna Gaon, as the entire time has been doing, was showing that this debate is regarding the status of the Jewish people. Right? We've come along with the Vilna Gaon every couple times to bring how he shows that the debate was really a challenge of the challenge to the Jewish people's status as the chosen nation. And this is what their argument was. This is what they wanted to say. Show us something that isn't worth its deterioration, that isn't worth its devaluation, was code for something else. And it was code for, you claim, you the Jewish people, after all we've discussed until now, all these other ideas, you claim you're the Am HaNivchar, you're the chosen people, but look at your history. Look at your exile, look at your suffering. Right? You experienced so much suffering in your history. Even your prehistory, you're going back to your slavery in Egypt, and then you get out, and then you're in the desert for 40 years, and then even then you get kicked out of your land, and that's really where we pick up, because we're talking about Rome, and we're talking about ancient Greece. You get kicked out of your land, but by who? Who do you get kicked out of your land by, ultimately? And again, this is the classic idea of the Vilna Gaon, by Esav. Remember, he keeps making, according to the Vilna Gaon, their questions are circling around this idea of Yaakov versus Esav. That we claim to be the Am HaNivchar, the Yaakov, but ultimately they try to show that Esav's brachos came true more than Yaakov's came true. And Esav was the chosen son as opposed to Yaakov. And look at you. Look at the Jews. You were kicked out of your land. But not only were you kicked out of your land, but who replaced you in your land? Who took over? Rome, Edom, Esav. You claim to be the chosen people, but isn't it clear that you were replaced by the more appropriate choice of the chosen nation? Again, the clearest sign that you are not the chosen people is all your suffering. Look around. Show me a value. Show me a kli, a utensil that's not worth as much as its depreciation, meaning that it doesn't make any sense. Nobody would replace something with something of lesser value. No one's going to replace something with something worth less. Not worth less, but worth less than the initial thing. So if you were replaced by Edom in the land of Israel, in control of your society, in control of your government, and Edom, Esav replaced you, doesn't that show that all along Esav had more value than you had the entire time? Sure, you enjoyed the ride, you were the chosen people, but you've been rejected. You've been thrown out in favor of a greater utensil, of a greater kli, of a greater nation, and that is the nation of Esav. Again, essentially the argument, and I want to say this is not a new argument, but it could be this was a new argument, but it's not a foreign argument to us. That this argument, that this suffering of the Jewish people is the sign, is the proof that we're not the chosen people. Why is this not a foreign argument? Because if one goes through Jewish history, and not just Jewish history, if one goes through the history of the Catholic Church, and their relationship towards the Jewish people, for centuries and centuries and centuries, this has been their go-to claim. The Jewish people are, maybe you were the chosen people at one point of history, but then God threw you out. The New Testament, right? Translated in Hebrew, Testament is, it's translated more accurately, I think, in Hebrew than it is in English. Testament means more like a testimony, like a record, as it were. In Hebrew, it's called the Bris Chadasha. That's how they translate the New Testament. The new covenant, they claim, because what's their claim? Our old covenant was thrown out, was done, was torn up by God, and the new covenant was given, and they're the chosen people. I want to do something a little bit different here that I haven't done till now, and I hope it works out. I have an amazing clip that I would like to play. I'm going to share my screen. I'm going to need your help. I've never done this, just to make sure that you can hear it. You'll give me I'll start playing. You give me a thumbs up or a thumbs down if you could hear it. Well, what I'm about to play is a clip from Rav Hershel Schachter. It was a speech from about 10 years ago, actually, on Yom Yerushalayim. And it's an amazing thing. He's talking about, again, the Catholic Church's response to the Jewish people reclaiming Eretz Yisrael and reclaiming Yerushalayim in particular. And I want to pull that up. So give me a moment. Let me grab that. And again, you'll help me to just make sure that we can hear it. Okay. So here I go. Here we go. You'll give me a thumbs up or a thumbs down. Can anyone hear that? Thumbs down. Okay. Really want to play this.
It's not being played.
Sorry?
You're not playing it.
So I was playing it. Did you hear it at all when I was playing it before?
No.
Nothing? Let's see. Oh, here. Here. Okay. How about that? Let's try it now. Maybe it'll work now.
The Catholics for centuries had to understand.
Yes. Okay, great.
The significance of Yom Yerushalayim. You have to go back a little bit in history. The Catholics for centuries have been claiming that the Jews are no longer the Am HaNivchar. Once we rejected Jesus, so we lost our status as Am HaNivchar, and therefore we're not entitled to Eretz Yisrael. Eretz Yisrael is the Eretz HaNevcheres for the Am HaNivchar, for the chosen nation, and they are the chosen nation. They claim that they follow Yoshke, they are the Am HaNivchar. The Jews have no right to Eretz Yisrael. That was the Catholic reaction to the Zionist movement for over 100 years. There used to be a Rebbe in the yeshiva years ago, Rabbi Feldblum. He passed away already. His first wife, unfortunately, was run over by an automobile right in front of the yeshiva. There never was a traffic light here until she was killed. And then they put a traffic light right on this corner. So his first wife's, she was from Philadelphia, so his first wife's doctoral dissertation was exactly on this topic. What was the response of the Catholic Church to the Zionist movement? So she documented, she quoted from all of the newspapers, all the Catholic newspapers from all over the world, that they wrote it's never going to happen. Eretz Yisrael will never be given over to the Jewish people because they lost their status as the Am HaNivchar. They rejected Jesus. We are the Am HaNivchar. It's impossible. When Eretz Yisrael was established in 1948, and for years they were torturing the Jews, and especially in the Holocaust, when they were killing the Jews, that you read records, the way the Nazis were torturing Jews, and they said, do you still believe that you are the Am HaNivchar? Do you still believe that? So they have many Jews said, yes, we would never torture anybody like you torture. We are the Am HaNivchar. You are not the Am HaNivchar. That's the response that many Jews gave. And there were missionaries all over the world in the middle of the Second World War trying to get all the Jews to convert to Christianity. You see that you're not the Am HaNivchar. The Jews were killed by the Nazis. You see in Europe and America, they stepped up all the missionary activities. So when the Medina was established in 1948, so the Catholic Church had to give a teretz. So first they were hoping it's going to disappear. They didn't recognize the Medina till years after Melchemet Sheshet Hayamim. Around 10 years ago is when the Vatican recognized the Medina Yisrael. For 50 years they didn't recognize it. It's against their religion. It's against the basic tenet of their religion. They claim that we lost the status of Am HaNivchar, and they're the real Am HaNivchar. So when the Medina was established, they were hoping, they're praying it's going to go away, it's going to disappear. It didn't disappear, so they had to figure out a teretz. So the official teretz was that the Jews don't have the Jews have Tel Aviv, the modern parts of Israel, but they don't have Eretz Yisrael. The real Eretz Yisrael is Hebron, where Avraham Avinu lived, Ir Atikah, the old city, the Mokum HaMikdash. The Jews don't have that. The Jews will never get that. That's impossible. They lost their status of Am HaNivchar, and that's the real Eretz Yisrael. After Melchemet Sheshet Hayamim, that was the tiyufta against the whole Catholic preaching, against the whole Avodah Zarah that they were preaching for so many centuries. So what did the Pope say the day after Kibush Yerushalayim? The day after, he said the Jews have to give up Yerushalayim, should be internationalized. Why do they have to internationalize it? Because it's against their religion. And the Pope Ad Hayom Hazeh says the same thing. The Catholic Church preaches the Jews have to surrender Yerushalayim. It's against their religion. How can we possibly have Yerushalayim? That's what they're preaching all along. The Jews will never get back Eretz Yisrael. The promises of the Nevi'im were all fulfilled. Eretz Yisrael was given back to the Jewish nation. It wasn't given back to the Catholics. It was given back to the Jewish people. You have to recognize, you have to realize what it means. Kibush Yerushalayim. What it means as far as the history of the relationship between the Jews and the Catholics. I was born in the middle of...
Okay, so we'll hold here again. First of all, first of all, what gets me about that thing is, you hear the emotion. That's always with a Herschel Schechter. You hear the emotion in his voice. But what is the message that he's getting at is, again, that it's it's not a quote unquote, maybe it's a new argument again in the Gemara, but it's a common argument that the suffering of the Jewish people is the proof that they are the rejected, that they were rejected from this covenant with God. And that's why Schechter was pointing out that's why it was such a sticking point, that one of these main ideas was, okay, the Bible talks all about the Jewish people inheriting the land of Israel, but you've been thrown out of Israel. You've been thrown out, and that's exactly what the Roman, what the Athenians were saying over here. You've been thrown out of your land. You've been thrown out of with your connection. You're no longer the chosen people. You're no longer the chosen nation, the Am HaNivchar, and your suffering is the proof for that. That was their point that they were making. Again, an extremely powerful point. Again, a common argument against the Jewish people. Again, especially, and the Catholic Church. Again, there were documents that came out later. This is historical. About knowledge of the Holocaust and the concept that the Holocaust was another proof that the Jewish people can't possibly be the chosen people, because look what's happening to them in Europe, right? Okay, so what was his response? How do you respond to that? You say, no, it's not true, but we know that that's not Rabbi Yehoshua ben Hananiah's way. He doesn't just say, no, it's not true. What does he do? A very sharp point. He says as follows. Well, he says as follows. He says that the mat represents Esav, correct, that coming into the house. But where you're mistaken is that it's not just a kli that's not worth its value, that we were just replaced by the Romans and the like, but rather the point of bringing in the mat. Who would bring in a mat knowing that they can't get it in the door? They knew whoever brought in the mat, in this case, namely HaKadosh Baruch Hu was the one bringing the mat in, knew that in order to get it in, the walls would need to have been broken. Meaning what? That our being kicked out of the land of Israel and our status and our suffering, the things that happened, particular to the land of Israel, were not because Esav and the Romans were so great and so deserving, but rather it's a punishment for us, for our sins. It's a punishment for our, the fact that we were derelict in our duties to serving God. But it has nothing to do with the status of Esav. It has nothing to do with the status of the other nations. The Jewish people can be the Am HaNivchar, the chosen people, but at the same time receive punishment, receive suffering. But why should that be? And I'd like to suggest that counter to what they were trying to prove, very often our suffering, very often our travails, bringing the mat. I'm sorry. Thank you for asking. It's a mat of reeds. It's a mat of reeds that what he was saying. His answer to them was by bringing a mat of reeds into the house. In order to get it into the house, you needed to break down the walls. That was the idea. What does that represent? That's what we're discussing. That very often our suffering is the proof of the opposite of our status of the Am HaNivchar. But before we do that, we have to understand, what does it mean? What does it mean to be the Am HaNivchar? What does it mean to be the chosen people? Before we get there, you know what? Yeah, what does it mean to be the chosen people? There's a very, very big misconception and a mistake that many people make, many Jews make, when they understand that what it means to be the chosen people is that it means that we are somehow superior, whether physically, whether morally, whatever it is, that we're somehow superior to the other nations in the world. That's what it means. We're the chosen people. We're superior. And in fact, unfortunately, and perhaps because we exude sometimes that that idea, it's often used against us, more often than not, as a trope, as, oh, the Jews think that they call themselves the chosen people. They think they're so high and mighty. They think they're superior to everyone else, which is extremely damaging to us, from a PR perspective. So what does it mean that we are the Am HaNivchar? What does it mean that we're the chosen people? So Rav Schechter, who we just heard from, I was listening to something that when he was speaking at the beginning of the coronavirus, the beginning of this whole pandemic, and he was explaining that we know that the world is clearly suffering right now, the whole world. So why do we? So how come again? We discussed last week that when we suffer, when we experience suffering, we don't say lama. Why? We say lema. For what? Right? Same word. Lama can be changed to lema. Not why, but for what? For what? Meaning, what can we do? What should our reaction, our response be? And Rav Schechter explained that we know the Torah tells us that it calls us B'ni Bechori Yisrael, that B'nai Yisrael, the Jewish people, are the Bechor, the firstborn of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which means that it doesn't mean that the other nations aren't the children of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but it means that we are the firstborn. What does it mean to be the firstborn? We know that in Halacha, the firstborn gets what's called Pishnayim, double portion of the inheritance of the father. Why? What did the firstborn do? Did the firstborn do anything in particular? All the firstborn did was be born first, right? I always joke around that we have our days mixed up on the calendar. We celebrate. For birthdays we celebrate the child, and Mother's Day we celebrate the mother. Sometimes it should be the opposite. For birthdays, we should all go back to the mother of the child and say, "Happy birthday!" You gave birth to the child. Hey, Mother's Day, the child made you a mother. But in any event, we should celebrate the mother on birthdays. So what's the point of the Bechor? What did the Bechor do? Why does the Bechor get Pishnayim, a double portion of the inheritance? Because the firstborn is given, whether it's fair or not, it's just the reality, has the responsibility of taking care of the rest of the children, of taking care, of setting an example, right? I have a firstborn, and he was, I can't say, we try not to play this card so much, but sometimes it's, why aren't you setting a good example for your younger siblings? Okay, your younger siblings are jumping on the table. Why? But you can't, because you have to set a good example for them. You have to be the example. You're older, you're more mature, as it were. Again, sometimes when your oldest is 5, he's not super mature. But in any event, the idea being that the Bechor's responsibility, the firstborn's responsibility, is to take care and to teach and to help the other children. And that's why when we experience suffering, our response needs to be, what can we do better to make the situation better for the world? Because as the Bechor of Hashem, as the B'nai Bechori Yisrael, as the Jewish people are the Bechor of Hashem, it is our responsibility to figure out what we can do, how we can make the world a better place, how we can be that light, that Or LaGoyim, that light among the nations, to show them the proper way to act, to bring God into their lives. Exactly like Lee was saying, that partly we have the obligation to bring the belief of one God to the nations. That's exactly right. In other words, that Pishnayim, being the Bechor, is not a privilege, but it's a responsibility. It's an obligation that we have. I'm going to quote from Rabbi Stephen Weil, an amazing. He has a great article in Jewish Action, where he really discusses. It's an amazing thing. He discusses Rabbi Weil. If anyone knows him originally from LA, now he actually is in New York, in Teaneck, New Jersey. Actually, he works for the OU now, and he discusses how he grew up in upstate New York they lived on a farm. His family was cattle dealers, and they lived out on a farm. And which meant that if you want to live out in farm country, you're at least 40 miles from the nearest Jew. So he went to a public school with very little affiliation, and he said that the unfortunate reality of growing up in such a setting was that whenever he got into fights with friends, very often that's when the anti-Semitic tropes would come out, and some of them were, "Oh, you're the chosen one, aren't you?" Stuff like that, which was, for a child, difficult to deal with. But what does it mean? So I'm just going to quote you. I'm going to read what he writes in terms of this. What does it mean to be the Am HaNivchar? So the Am HaNivchar, the chosen people, the chosen nation, means that we were chosen to engage in a mission. We were chosen by God, and in turn, we chose to partner with God in the mission of the transformation and the perfection of humanity. All human beings have the obligation to lead a life of ethical monotheism, which is encapsulated by the covenant that God made with humanity. We refer to the covenant of the Sheva Mitzvos Bnei Noach, the 7 Noahide mitzvos. The Jewish people, by adopting the covenant of the Torah and the 613 mitzvos, not only adopted a change in their lifestyle, but adopted a system and a society of perfected ethical monotheism. The Jewish nation does not have its own perfection as an end goal and purpose of the covenant. The covenant demands that we are responsible for the destiny of all humanity. On the one hand, this is an awesome responsibility. On the other, it is the greatest opportunity that a human being can have to be able to work and partner with his creator. That's what Rabbi Weil writes. That as the Am HaNivchar, what it means, again, the premise of the Athenians was all wrong. We don't think we're superior, and therefore, if we get rejected, it must be because Esav is more favorable. No, because we have this responsibility, well, then we have to bear the brunt. We have to bear the pain and the suffering for our actions. Because if we're the Bechor, again, we see it all the time. Again, parents, again, it's a hard line to draw, but we see that sometimes you hold the oldest child up to a higher standard than the others because they need to set the bar. They're responsible for setting the bar. That's what it means to be the chosen people. And therefore, just because you got kicked out does not speak at all to the fact that our bris, that our covenant ended. It just means that we weren't worthy at this point of giving our own locale, of giving Eretz Yisrael, of being able to hold on to it at that moment. And therefore, the fact that Esav took over is not speaking to the lack of worth of the Jewish people, but again, it's an increase of worth of Esav, that he is more valuable than Yaakov, but rather it's the Jewish people experiencing suffering for not fulfilling their obligation. This idea of our obligation to be an Or LaGoyim, of being the Am HaNivchar, is a very, very important one. I'll tell you, I'm gonna bare my soul a little bit, and I don't mean to be too critical. I don't mean to, but I guess I do mean to if I'm saying this. But after the Siyam HaShas, there was a major celebration for the Jewish people just a few months ago. If you can imagine a world where 100,000 Jews can gather together in a stadium. I mean, it's hard to say without tearing up of where we are now, where with social distancing and being so apart from one another and Zoom sharing, just 6 months ago, January 1st, 2020, 100,000 Jews in a stadium celebrating the finishing of the Talmud and the starting in a new. You can't even think about it. It's unbelievable. The first time I thought about this was somebody brought it up to me before we had even opened the shuls again, and said we had 100,000 Jews together and it was amazing. Now what would we do for a minyan to get 10 together in a room to say Baruch Hu? Right? It's an amazing thing. But the reaction, the response after the Siyam HaShas was beautiful. It was beautiful because what were all of the things that were saying, that all of the security guards and the policemen that were there, they had never experienced such a thing, that every single person said thank you to them on their way out. It was such a Kiddush Hashem. They'd never experienced. They'd been to many, the people who worked at the stadium had been to many games, many football games, and they had never experienced such a thing where everyone said thank you on the way out. It was such a beautiful, beautiful Kiddush Hashem. And I remember saying, yes, it's beautiful, but how sad is it? How sad is it that that's the bar that we set? That we're praising people for saying thank you for doing something for us. Can you imagine? That's something we say to our children when they go on a field trip. Don't forget to say thank you to the bus driver. The fact that we said thank you, that's what we're praising Bnei Yisrael for. The fact that we had common decency, that's what human beings are supposed to do. Again, I'm not taking away. The reality is, unfortunately, that is a high bar. Unfortunately. But we can't lose sight of the fact that that is our responsibility. That's what it means that we are the chosen people. It doesn't mean we're special. We are special. Obviously, every Jew is special. Every human being is special. But what it means is that we have an obligation, a responsibility to have that higher standard, to live to that higher standard, to be that higher standard, to set that bar as the firstborn. That's what we're supposed to do. And if we do that, then Emir Hashem, says Rabbi Yehoshua, back to the Athenians, yes, you're right. Right now, we're in a tough spot. Maybe we're not being that Or LaGoyim, but if we can, get back to that point, then the land will come back to us as well. For sure. Because once there's no more reason to punish us for being derelict in our duties as the firstborn, well, then everything can go back to normal. We can come back to our land. We'll have the Davidic dynasty once again with Mashiach, and with the end of suffering and the end of evil and the end of all things, that and the us being able to show people again that belief in the one God, to show that HaKadosh Baruch Hu's light is everlasting and ever bright and just continuously gives good, to eliminate all evil from the world. That's what it means to be the Am HaNivchar, and that was Rabbi Yehoshua ben Hananiah's response to the Athenians. And with that, the debate was concluded. That was number 12. That was the final question. Now, what I want to do now is I want to just read to the end of the Gemara, because we can't just end without ending the Gemara. I'm not going to elaborate. There are some more things to elaborate on. There are some more agadic points. We're not going to go into all of them. They're a little more esoteric, and I'll be honest, I had a hard time understanding them. And if I had a hard time understanding, it's hard for me to present them. But let's just read till the end. So what happens next? He gives them, they realize he wins the debate. Now, if you remember from long ago, the condition of the debate was, if you beat us, we'll come on your boat. We'll do whatever you want. So he brings them one to the ship. And if you remember, the ship, again, this is now, I'm talking 2 months ago, we discussed this. The ship had 60 rooms because there were 60 Athenian sages. So each one, kol chad ki chazi shitin bistriki, when they each saw 60 seats in each room, they said, oh, my fellows will be joining me. Kulu chavar lahacha asu, all my colleagues are going to be coming here. Amar le safona shari safintach. So when they were all on board, again, they wouldn't have come on had they known he was going to separate them. But each of them saw 60 seats in each of the 60 rooms. So they said, oh, I'm going to be with my buddies. Okay, but he really separated each of them. Once they were all on the boat, he told the captain, take off, let's go. So they go, they untie, they go. Bahadi the kaasu shaka afra me'afrayu. So when he was leaving, he grabbed some of the dirt from Athens with him and put it in a little satchel and brought it with him. We'll see why he did that in a minute. Kimatu leveblio, when he got to, again, this is the part where I didn't really delve into because it's a little bit complicated, a lot of it complicated. If anyone wants, you can look at the Maharal for more in-depth understanding. Upon reaching the place of the waters that swallow, he filled a small jug of water from the waters that swallow. Again, the waters that swallow, Rashi explains, are that if you pour water into it, it just, in a sense, the water absorbs itself, and it's used to understand why the water doesn't just come onto the land and take over the land. Again, a complicated idea. Chazinu da'afu mani. So he brought them to Caesar. He brought them back to Caesar, who was the impetus of this entire trip, of this conversation between Rabbi Yehoshua ben Hananiah and the Roman Caesar. He brings them back to Caesar, and the Caesar sees Chazinu. He sees that they're meek. Because what happens? The people, they're sitting there. The Athenians are captured by Rabbi Yehoshua ben Hananiah now, and he brings them back, and they're looking very meek and very weak and very quiet. And he says, Hanulav minhum, these aren't them. I know the Athenian sages. They're arrogant. They're obnoxious, they're disgusting. These aren't them. So what does he do? Shakal me'afrayu. He takes some of the soil, the Athenian soil, and he throws it on the Athenians. And all of a sudden, akshulape malka, and all of a sudden they start growing haughty and they start growing, they become themselves again. Again, the Maharal explains this idea that what we see, that although the Athenians were, again, they profit to be these, very philosophical and above nature kind of guys, in a sense that we don't live in this world, we live above. So what it showed with the dirt was that no, they were just full of gaiva. They were full of materialism, and they had that pride, and it was all a show. And once he threw the dirt on them, they became themselves again. Okay, so Caesar got upset that they became obnoxious towards Caesar. So what did he do? So he said to Yehoshua ben Hananiah, do with them as you please. Yehoshua brought the water that he had placed, the water that swallows, and he put it into a barrel. And he said to the Athenians, fill this barrel, and then you could leave. And they started filling it with water, but again, the water is the water that swallows, whatever that means. And the water kept swallowing it, etc., etc., and it says that they kept trying to do it. They filled it until their shoulders were disjointed, and they wore themselves out and went to their destruction. And that is the end of the story. So ultimately, they lose again. There's a lot of agarta in terms of how that ending really plays in. We're going to leave that because, again, it's a little bit more esoteric, and I don't fully understand it. But what I'd like to do now is we really completed this journey together. Again, we went from Bavel really, again, we pointed out in the first year, it's a misnomer. This is a Tana. So it's from Eretz Yisrael back to Bavel, to Athens, back to Eretz Yisrael, now back to Bavel with the Gemara, on this journey together. And we've seen and learned many, many, many important lessons. Just to review, again, our main players that we had in the understanding these debates had been the Maharsha, the Maharal, and the Vilna Gaon. And we had the Kedushas Levi as well. And again, the themes that we discussed in all of these debates had been very, very important ideas. Ideas about character, refinement, ideas about, again, the Maharsha very often talked about the relationship between God and the Jews. And it was constantly a discussion about the Jews' relationship with the Torah, that, you didn't keep the Torah and therefore you get rejected, etc. Back and forth. You remember the very first debate was about putting the pin in the wall and you don't keep the Torah, etc. And again, he disproved them. The Maharal very often spoke about that this was the quintessential argument between the Jews and the Athenians was about the nature of nature and supernature, in a sense. That what is the status of the Jews vis-a-vis nature and the supernatural world, the spiritual world? Is the world merely just a natural, chaotic place where, again, chaos and randomness reigns, or is it like the Jewish belief that there is a maker, there's an architect to this world, and although we don't understand his ways, and although we don't live in the sky and the heavens, and we're rooted on the earth, we believe that all that HaKadosh Baruch Hu, all that Hashem does is good. And that we just need to ask ourselves, what can we do to see that good, to find that good? And finally, as we just pointed out, we have the Vilna Gaon that talks about the fact the entire debate was about the status of the Jewish people as the Am HaNivchar, the chosen nation, vis-a-vis their suffering. And the important lesson, especially tonight, and I'd like to bridge the two together, that again, the Am HaNivchar, when we fail as the Am HaNivchar, as the chosen nation, is going back to the Kedushas Levi or Levi Yitzchak Mivarditcha, is when we get haughty about it. Is when we get full of ourselves that, we are the chosen people and therefore we can do no wrong. That is a mistake. To be the chosen nation requires humility, a great humility, a recognition that we have a job to do. That yes, we may have an elevated status in regards to holiness and being able to reach certain spiritual heights based on our connections, based on our teachings. But that only comes with the humility of recognizing that that's not for naught, that's not just for our enjoyment and our status, but that we have a job to do with it, that we have a responsibility and an obligation to bring light to the world, to make the world better as the older brother, as the older sister, as the older child, the oldest child, to show how the world should act, to be an example, to show what we should be doing. And Amir Tashem, we should take the lessons of all the lessons that we've learned the past 8 weeks, 9 weeks, the lessons of Yehoshua ben Hanania, and be able to apply them to our lives, to see the world through this lens of our status and the status of ourselves vis-a-vis the Torah and vis-a-vis nature, to be able to elevate ourselves to become that Am HaNivchar, to be that chosen people, to be that chosen nation, ultimately to bring light to the world. So I thank you, all of you, for joining me on this journey of Yehoshua ben Hanania and these stages. I'd like to throw out an idea. And this is regarding this is the end of this series, this 8-week series, this 8-part series, and we're going to be starting a new series. And I have a couple of ideas, but I would like to get some input. I'm going to pause the recording here because we're finished, so I'm going to stop recording, but I'm going to leave Facebook.